Spellcheck, Getting Unbiased Design Feedback, an AIGA Portfolio Festival webinar with 3M. I'm Huang, and today we'll learn how to optimize your designs and pitch your work confidently with vision data on your side using 3M's visual attention software, or Vaz, which uses powerful AI to predict with 92% accuracy what is likely to get noticed at first glance. So in this workshop, we'll get a demo from some members of the 3M team. We'll see how everything works. And then we have a couple volunteers who are fellow participants from the AIGA Portfolio Festival who have graciously allowed us to run their work through the software to see how that is being perceived, and they'll get feedback on how to maybe change up their work and tweak it going forward. I'll introduce our two presenters from 3M now. First, we have Sean Springer, who is a Vaz application engineer at 3M. He's been hooked ever since seeing 3M visiting wizards play with fire liquid nitrogen in the 3rd grade. He's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, holding degrees in chemistry and material science. And Sean is now the lead application engineer for 3M's visual attention software and also product engineer for Scotch brand consumer crafting products. Our second presenter is Martine Sticha, a senior consumer brand designer. Martine grew up in Wisconsin with an early eye for design and noticed the colors and the type and the illustration on her cereal box while she was growing up. And after 20 years in the industry, she brings the same creative passion to her role today within 3M's consumer design team by designing aisle-popping, eye-catching packaging for a variety of office-related products. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Sean and Martine for the demo, and I'll be back for Q&A later on.
Awesome. Thank you, Lishan. So welcome to a visual spell check, getting unbiased design feedback. So I'm Sean, and Martine is our other presenter here. Thank you, Lishan, for the introductions. So I'm going to spend about 10 minutes at the beginning going through a brief overview of visual attention science and some of the psychology and neuroscience behind the early stages of human vision. From there, I'll talk about how we can actually simulate this with artificial intelligence. Finally, the bulk of our presentation today is going to be those live reviews with Julie and Juan. At the end, I've left some time for Q&A, so please feel free to post your questions in the chat as we go. I'll also build in a couple breaks for Q&A along the way, so let us know if anything isn't making sense. Would love to take some questions. So let's talk a little bit about vision science. So the first thing I want to talk about is that there's really two types of vision. Unconscious vision is the type of vision you're probably more familiar with. This is where we're using our higher functioning brains. This is where we're reading, where we're understanding what we're looking at. But really, there's two phases to vision. And before you get to conscious vision, you kind of have to go through this first glance phase of vision. This is where you don't really know what you're seeing yet. Your brain hasn't figured out the world around you. And it's what happens right when you're presented with a new visual or walk into a new situation. So this first glance vision phase happens in about the first 3 to 5 seconds. After that time, it kind of slowly fades into conscious vision. And it's really governed by what I call bottom-up processes. These are kind of deep in your brain, and they're done subconsciously. They're done automatically. They're not conscious vision. So why does this matter? Because to get your audience through to conscious vision, you have to pass through this first glance phase of vision first. You have to grab their attention while they're still in this subconscious processing phase for them to notice all of the excellent work you put into your design consciously. And we know you don't have a lot of time to grab someone's attention. This is a study from Microsoft that showed in the 15 years between 2000 and 2015, the average American's attention span dropped by 4 seconds. And we think that it's likely to continue getting shorter and shorter. So if more than half the time that your audience if more than half the time that you have to grab your audience's attention is in this first glance phase of vision, it can be helpful to turn to neuroscience and vision science to understand how this part of the visual system works. So to get us kicked off here, I actually have a quick video from Brian, who is a PhD in neuroscience and cognitive science, double PhD, and one of the primary inventors of Vaz.
So if your cortex processed all the information that fell on your retina and the whole visual field with the same amount of detail and processing, your brain would never fit through the birth canal. So what that means is that there has to biologically be a mechanism for your visual system to select information from the environment. Turns out you have cells in the back of your brain, in your visual cortex, for example. Some of them fire faster when something red falls on your retina, and then fire slower, those same cells, when something green falls on your retina. So you have kind of red-green detectors. And that makes evolutionary sense as far as you have fruit against trees. Then you also have things like shape and edges, contrast. How quickly does something change from light to dark? And that's relevant because it helps your brain figure out if something's a shadow or an edge of an object. And so there are these kind of building blocks of vision that guide your eyes early on through the visual world, and that's visual attention.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. There's kind of two key takeaways from that video. The first is that vision requires effort. And the second is that we have these processes, these mechanisms for selecting what we actually focus on. And to explain both of these a little more, I've got a quick game for all of you. And this game is called Find the Green O. So on each of these next slides, I'm going to show you various characters. And when you see the green O, I'd like you to post in the chat if you're willing. All right. Pretty simple. I see some flashes here. Yeah, so this one's really easy. This corresponds with the building block of edges. Really simple to see this when your design is this simple. Similarly, if the only thing that's different is color, also pretty simple. This is something that you can process almost entirely pre-consciously. You know what's grabbing attention since it's the only variation in your design. But as soon as you start mixing and matching even two of the building blocks, you use two different regions of your brain, and they have to communicate with each other in order to understand and make out what you're seeing. So this next design represents that. A little more complicated. All right. How many people saw the O over on the right here? And how many people saw the one on the bottom left down over here? And if you saw both, you get extra credit. I'm not sure how I'm grading this, but I'll give you extra credit, I promise. It's a bit of a trick question. I didn't tell you there were going to be two of them. But one of the points that I'd like to get across is that as your designs increase in complexity, and really this is very simple, there's only two building blocks in play here, you'll probably be using all five or at least four in your designs. And as it gets more complex, it's really easy for your audience to miss seeing something if you don't draw their eyes directly over it. One of the reasons you can just miss seeing something entirely is because we don't process as much as we think we do. So what 2 degrees looks like is if I hold my thumb out at arm's length, that's about the size of my thumbnail. So that's all you get with any one eye movement. So as we're first reacting to a scene, this is what we think we see. We think we see the entire scene because this is what's reported back up to our conscious brains. But what we're actually seeing with our eyes is more like that. That's the 2 degrees that we get. So in this first glance phase of vision, those first 3 to 5 seconds, what our brains are doing, our subconscious mind, is guiding our eyes around. And they're taking lots of these 2-degree cuts. They'll take a 2-degree cut here, a 2-degree cut there, a 2-degree cut there. And then our subconscious brain will stitch all of that together into an image and pass that up to our conscious minds like we saw everything, which we really didn't. Our expectations, we actually kind of fill in the gaps with what we think we'll see. And that process is what we call first glance vision. So if you have absolutely critical content, it's necessary to make sure that your audience's eyes are going to be pulled right over that in the pre-conscious phase in order to ensure that they'll actually see that and react to it consciously. So how do we know where our eyes going to go during that first glance phase, that pre-conscious phase where we're deciding what our eyes actually focus on based off those kind of building blocks of vision? And that's where AI comes in. So our brains actually use these 5 elements to guide our eyes early on during that visual process. So edges of objects, text shows up as edges. Intensity, also called brightness contrast or luminance contrast, is an important factor as well. Red, green, and blue, yellow are kind of strange to a lot of people in the design world who are more familiar with like RGB or CMYK color space. And so it's a common question of why we chose to break it out this way. And the answer is we didn't choose it. We didn't choose red and green and blue and yellow because it was easy to program or anything like that. That's actually the cones that we have in our eyes. So there's a biological basis for separating color contrast out to red, green, and to blue, yellow. Finally, similarly, there's a biological basis to faces. As humans, we are programmed to react to and recognize human faces. So because these are the elements that our brains use to guide our eyes to the visual world, this is also what what AI is built on. So it simulates each of these individual elements and as well as the complex interactions between them in order to understand and report what will provide attention. And I think I talked a little ahead here, but this is how AI as a visual spell check works. It actually simulates what's going on in our brains. There's actually 7 to 9 different unique algorithms built into Vaz. And these are tailored for different viewing conditions because the way our brains work isn't quite the same with digital content as it is with print. One example is something called center fixation bias. We're more likely to look at things in the middle of our screens first. This center fixation bias doesn't exist in print or out in the real world, where anything could grab our attention, not just things that are more towards the middle. This software was created by proprietary 3M science. We get a lot of questions about that. So a lot of people know 3M as stuff that's sticky and scratchy, adhesives and abrasives, right? So why are we playing in this area? And something else I like to talk about is that we actually have about 70 years of research that goes into Vaz. And 70 is a lot when you're talking about AI, when AI as a field hasn't really existed for 70 years. And the reason for that comes out of our transportation safety division. So I'm really going on the side here, but I think it's really cool. So 3M makes these retroreflective films for vests and road signs and stuff like that. And for a long time, the focus was on making them brighter and brighter and brighter. But eventually there were diminishing returns to just making things brighter. And so if it wasn't just brightness that was capturing attention, we wanted to understand what would capture human attention, what would show up in the first glance phase of vision in order to make people safer on roads. And so that's where this research comes from. And where Vaz as an AI was developed was for transportation safety. But now we've broadened it and applied it to lots of different viewing conditions so you can use it in your designs too. As Sean mentioned in the intro, we're 92% accurate. It's a claim I'm really proud of because one eye tracking study can only predict another one with about 95% accuracy. So we're really pushing the fundamental limit of how well human vision can be predicted. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more again about first glance versus conscious vision, now that you've kind of gone through all of this with me and know a little more. One of the really cool things with Vaz only modeling first glance vision and not conscious vision is that it's the same for all human beings. It doesn't matter whether your text is written left to right or right to left, everything just shows up as edges in this early phase of our process. Because it's so kind of deep in your brains, I like to talk about it as like the monkey brain or the lizard brain. It doesn't matter whether your audience is male or female, doesn't matter where in the world they're from, doesn't matter their age or any other demographics like that. All human beings share the same early visual processing system. Now, that is absolutely not true for conscious vision, and that is where you as the designer take over. So with conscious vision, you are the expert. You know your product, you know your audience, and you're able to design for it. But again, you kind of have to break through this first glance phase in order to get there. And this first glance phase isn't necessarily intuitive. By definition, something that happens pre-consciously is tough to consciously understand. So first glance vision, really tough for humans, really easy for AI. It can be modeled. Conscious vision, basically impossible for AI, but that's where designers can leverage their expertise. Again, Vaz is not a replacement for a designer. I say this a lot. We see it as a tool for designers for this reason. Designers and Vaz make a really good pair. It can help early on in the process, making sure that your content is noticed and engaged with. Again, though, it doesn't help make sure that your content's understandable, Vaz doesn't understand brand guidelines, design principles, or aesthetics, doesn't understand color theory, it doesn't understand any of that. So we see Vaz as being best used early on in the process to make sure that what you want to be noticed is being noticed. And so we see it as a tool for iterating on your designs, as well as a tool to provide some objective data, especially given that, it doesn't vary. This pre-conscious phase doesn't vary from person to person. So you can objectively show that your top elements of your visual hierarchy are actually going to be seen using Vaz. So we see it also as a tool for presenting or selling your designs as well. Okay. With that, I'm going to pause here for questions. I think I see one in the Q&A. Lishan or Lisa, would you be willing to read that off for me?
Sure thing. So this is a question from Heather. How many years did 3M start working on Vaz? I feel like it's been promoted in the early 2000s. Has it been in use since then, or is it being newly marketed now?
For sure, yeah. So the original development of Vaz does go all the way back to the 2000s. I think the first full system of the current version of it came out in about 2011. And I think 2011 was the first time it was available external to 3M. So it was kind of an internal tool prior to that. Although there may have been other precursors, I'll be honest, we're talking about time when I was back in high school still, so I'm not a full expert there. But yes, we are recently remarketing Vaz. So we've made a lot of updates in terms of stability and in terms of tweaking the accuracy to actually make it a little bit more accurate, as well as adding plugins for Photoshop, Illustrator, and XD. So yes, it is an older product that we have updated and are pushing again.
And we have another question coming in from Kate, and also responding to a comment from Christopher to the panelists, basically around color blindness. So you showed the red and green X's and O's earlier. Is that something that Vaz takes into account, or maybe just the general question about accessibility?
Yeah, that's a question we get a lot, and it's something we're working on. So there isn't a colorblind mode built into Vaz. That said, if you're a Photoshop user, we highly recommend Photoshop's colorblind filters. So you can go into Photoshop, and I can show you or send something out later if you'd like about how to do it. You probably know this already. I'm talking more than I need to. But using Photoshop's colorblind filters in order to change the image to how it would appear for someone with various types of colorblindness, and then running the Vaz plugin in Photoshop on that filtered image is the best way to check your designs and check how Vaz, or use Vaz to check how visual attention would work for someone with various types of color blindness.
All right, and one more question from Margot now. Does the primacy of first vision repeatedly reassert itself after conscious vision begins to operate at the forefront?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, no. So first glance vision only happens right when you're first reacting to a new situation or a new visual. Now, if that situation or visual changes every time I advance a slide, when you walk through the doorway in your house into a new room, for example, you'll go back to that first glance vision phase. But generally, once you understand the situation, once you've passed through first glance vision and are into conscious vision, you don't re-enter first glance vision unless the situation changes completely. And again, I kind of talk about it a little bit like a dichotomy, like one's over here and one's over there. And that's partially for the purposes of this explanation, because I want to get across the differences between them and the fact that there isn't just one type of vision. However, you're not truly just in one or the other. In the first few milliseconds, you'll be pretty purely in first glance vision. After 3 to 5 seconds, you'll be pretty purely in conscious vision. But in between the two, you can almost think of it as, I don't know, like stacked triangles, if that makes any sense, as you slowly kind of move from primarily bottom-up subconscious processing to more primarily top-down guided search conscious processing.
So maybe we have time for one more. This one's from Sally. Considering 3M Vaz lists facial preference as a factor in design, is the company doing anything to prevent possible biases or damage created with AI when it comes to race? I guess this has to do with recognizing faces of people with different skin tones.
For sure. Yeah, that's something that I think we need to explore further. I don't think that we're working on that right now, but I know there are people in 3M who are really concerned about ethics in AI and ethical development of AI, from everything from making sure that facial recognition is equitable to also making sure that facial recognition is not used in places it shouldn't be. So there are groups in the company working on that, but it is a really important topic.
Great. Well, thanks for your questions, folks. I'll turn it back to Sean, but if you have other questions in the meantime, post in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end.
Awesome. Thank you. So actually, Juan, if you would be willing, would you want to give a little bit of an introduction of yourself, and then we'll jump into the live demo of your designs in the web app?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Juan. I'm a graphic designer, art and creative director originally from Venezuela. I've done from print to branding to events to a surfing magazine and a little bit of everything in between. This specific project, it's an independent news, the redesign for the entire site of an independent news outlet. And when I was presented with the opportunity to run Vaz into some of my design, I thought that this could be a very interesting case. First of all, because it's an actual project. You can go right now to whowhatwhy.org and see this design working in the real world. But then we had some interesting it's news, right? We want our users to first read the latest stories and the newest content that our editors think it's the most important content for our users to read and to get directed to. But then there's elements of like in every web and every digital product of branding and navigation and calls to action to generate revenue for the organization to keep generating this content, that we wanted to understand how they were competing against each other, or if they were competing against each other, or if we were drawing our user's eye to one point versus the other one. So when I was offered the opportunity to use Vaz on a design project, I thought this could be perfect. This could be exactly what we needed to hear.
Awesome. So I'm taking you kind of into the Vaz web app here. So this is what the web app looks like once you're logged in. I've already got his website loaded up here, so you can just drop them right in here. These are the different conditions that I mentioned. So in this case, it's a digital web page that we're looking at. And you'll notice that Vaz identified these faces. So it flagged these as faces, which is important so that the algorithm knows that they're faces and knows to bring a little more attention there than it otherwise would. So Juan, you already talked about a little bit of what's most important here. So I'm selecting a couple areas of interest. These are areas that you want a little more information on. So do you want to help tell me what?
Yeah, so maybe the feature, the feature article, which is in this case, this latest stories with this image and the headline, the main navigation as well, probably the hamburger menu and the donate button too. Exactly, and that navigation to the main categories of content.
Cool. So once we've got those selected, we'll click Analyze. And here we get to our areas of interest pane. So this is the first main readout we have. And what this is telling you is the % chance that the area that's bounded, the squares we just drew on the previous panel, is to be seen during that pre-conscious vision phase. So there's an 86% chance that your viewer's eyes will land within here, within those first few seconds, 65% chance for the logo, and then down to slightly smaller chances for the smaller elements on the pane up there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we can get a heat map. And as we expect, we can see that a lot of attention is being drawn by these two large faces. And the other thing I'm kind of noticing is it seems like a lot of the attention is being brought into the lower left of the screen, with the faces drawing the attention over this way, as well as the slightly bolder stories here, and a more lightly colored story up here, not drawing as much attention over towards it. Our hotspots presents a lot of the same information as the heat map in the areas of interest. You can think of this as just like the areas of interest, except they're automatically drawn by Vaz. So, and if the heat map is more of a qualitative map of where the attention is, this is more of a quantitative or almost topographical map. So each of the areas that is circled is a local maximum. So they show the different kind of local maximums of attention within the image and where those are bounded. And finally, our gaze sequence. So where the eyes are actually going to go. Or where, you know, the best guess of the first 4 places that the eyes are going to focus. So Juan, does this match kind of your expectations?
In a way, yeah. It would be. I would be curious what happens when the main story has an image without faces, because I'm guessing that we're getting a high number in the main, in the feature story image, because in this case we're seeing faces and we're programmed to recognize faces everywhere. So it would be interesting to see what happens with this landing page without a face.
So I have one here for a different landing page. So a lot of the kind of same information. I selected slightly different boxes for this one, obviously. So I can go through and reanalyze, actually. Maybe I'll do that real quick.
Okay.
So I can delete the ones that I selected here. And I took my best guess, but at the hierarchy, but obviously I was off by a little bit. So let's reselect with what is actually most critical on this page, and then look at it again. So one of the final readouts that I didn't show initially is our visual elements pane. So this is one of the more complex ones. But if you remember back to kind of the different building blocks of vision, you can actually see what role each of those building blocks play in terms of directing the attention. So as we expect with no faces here, there's nothing in this faces box. But it looks like kind of the strong edges as well as intensity of that main area, plus just a larger size box, you know, makes there be a lot higher chance of attention falling within it in general too. We can see from D versus B. So even though D is a little bit larger, it has more intensity with those text compared to the donate button, that the colors used in the donate button, that red-green contrast, as well as a little bit of blue-yellow contrast, is actually drawing more attention to the donate button than the entire main navigation menu, despite the difference in the lesser or the less edges. That color is bringing the attention there.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, this is fascinating. Huh. Wow.
So if you were to use any of this feedback, Juan, I'm just kind of curious, how would you use this? Or is this feel useful to you? Or does this feel useful to you?
It is. It actually, yeah, it makes me, I think in a way, we've done a pretty decent job at presenting information in a way that at least the editorial team wants this information to be presented, where we have like our main feature story being the first thing, and then some of the other content being looked at it, and then going back into some other branding and navigation elements. This is really interesting.
So one other really cool thing to think about, and this is a challenging thing to design, especially where the stories and the images are going to change all of the time. You provided us with a final one that I kind of want to show, where it was blank, so the actual wireframe. So I'm just going to compare and show off our compare feature here to put things kind of side by side. And we can see how adding the images changes where the attention goes. So with just your wireframe, we're actually getting a 98% chance for that donate button, versus down to about a 31% chance once the actual images are put in, which is, that's a big difference.
It is. But then on the flip side, like, you know, the goal of this, it's to provide news and information. So I think by looking at this with the actual content versus just gray squares for where images were supposed to be, it kind of like tell us, okay, yes, images are doing what they're supposed to do, which is drive attention to a specific article and hopefully generate a click-through and have users engage with the content.
Awesome. Yeah, really cool.
But then on the flip side, if you look at the gaze sequence of the wireframe versus the actual live side, it was like perfectly how would I want them to read my side as a C, right? Where on the left-hand side in the live content, you see the eye doesn't do that C pattern that we are trying to achieve as designers on a page. But then that possibly might change based on the content of these images whenever they are updated and whatnot. It's just fascinating.
For sure, yeah. I think it brings a really good point, which is when using Vaz, it's almost always best to try and get what you're running through Vaz as close to what the audience is going to see. So in the case of like a website like this, mocking up images really does, well, not mocking up, these are live images, but adding the images really does change the attention or change the vision or change where the attention goes.
But then also on the flip side, I see like the structure in the wireframe was done in a way that it's just like, okay, yes, this is exactly what we wanted to achieve with this design. But then like when you add the constant changes of new images and whatnot, the users will look at the site and the homepage differently. Interesting.
Might be getting a little small with 3, but I just kind of wanted to look at all 3 different versions side by side here. And yeah, you can kind of see how the attention spread changes based on what the images are.
Yeah. I guess for something with dynamic content, though, it's really hard to get it perfect all the time versus a static design piece where, once it's laid out and it's either printed or saved as JPEG or whatever it is, and it's going to be what it is. But no, it's still very powerful, though. This is amazing. Thank you so much, Juan.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. Awesome. I think if you don't have anything else to add or any other comments you'd like to make, I'll pass it over to Martine then.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. That was great. And also remember too, Juan, like this is the first 3 to 5 seconds, so like it's the viewer's initial like path of vision and initial attraction. So, your design also is doing a lot of like work too. That's just like, got to keep that in focus too.
Yeah, no, of course. It's only like the very first seconds of a user glancing at design, and usually a user will make a decision not in 3 seconds, but probably like 10 seconds or whatnot. So just to see that things are going in the way we plan for, it's talking about how successful this design really will be, and then like how can the information changing and whatnot, like there's still a lot of work to do to engage on a conscious level with users.
Absolutely. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, no, thank you.
All right, Julie Dawson, you're on.
All right, let me unmute.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself and your design track.
Hi. Well, I'm Julie Dawson. I live in Covington, Kentucky, which is right across the river from Cincinnati, Ohio. But I was born on the West Coast in Washington State and moved over here when I was 5. I still want to go back. I graduated from Savannah College of Art and Design in 2015 with a graphic design major and a minor in illustration. And this is one of the projects I did when I was in school, Gil Sands playing cards, which we're going to assess here.
Yeah, great. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your design and sort of the background around it?
Yes. So the goal was to emphasize the face cards and the symbols. So I used the bold letters and the colors to try to draw your eye in with that. And I also wanted the back of the cards to be seen as well, because the Gil Sands typeface was originally made for the railroad. So I wanted it to look a little bit like a railroad track. And so that was part of the reason for putting the back of the cards in the design as well. And so in order to emphasize with that, I did use bold letters, limited use of color, and then placement.
Great.
To try to get the hierarchy in there.
That's awesome. Thanks. So I think from that, I'm going to take my takeaway is going to be, so your main goal, because I always like to have a goal or some objectives to work towards so that the data actually makes some sense,
Right.
Is to highlight this area here, highlight this.
Yes.
So basically these two faces, your king of spades and your king of diamonds, and then as well as the pattern on the back of the card.
Right.
Cool. So what I want to do is now show you how to use the Photoshop plugin. So I'm already in Photoshop.
Okay.
And what you do in Photoshop is you grab the rectangle tool. And then I like to go up to just this top toolbar and double check to make sure that I have the shape selected. I like to make sure that it's a fill of none because I don't want it to obscure what I'm actually selecting. And then make a stroke color of a contrasting color so you can see it as you're making your strokes, and a width that is appropriate for you so that you can see it. It'll get modified, you'll see. And then we just go ahead and draw some boxes around the areas that we want to identify. So we've got our 3 areas. And then I'll go into my layers panel and we'll see, I'll select those 3 areas and then go to the Vaz plugin, which is really great because it's a color. So it's one of the only things that's colored in your toolbar. It's got the yellow background and the blue eye. We'll click on that. And same as in the web app, you have to choose a content type. So there are 9 criteria for that. And I think print best describes what this criteria would be. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to convert to areas of interest. And you'll know that you're converted to areas of interest because the selections will turn from whatever color you had to this bright green with a dashed line. And then I'm going to select Analyze. This takes like a little bit longer than it does in the web app. So it's like maybe 30 seconds, time enough to run to the fridge and grab a pickle or fill your coffee. And in just a minute here, we'll have some results. Seems like the first half kind of drags and then it just.
Of course.
As usual.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Cool.
All right. So what this is showing us in this very first view are the areas of interest. And so in the panel, in the flyout panel for the Vaz plugin, you can toggle between the different maps and the different bits of data so that you can help build your story and understand what the data is telling you. And I want to start with just the holistic information. So the heat map, the hotspots, and the gaze sequence, that data is analyzing your entire design. So it's not just taking into account your areas of interest, it's looking at everything. So your areas of interest in the adjacency to the other parts of the design. What I love about this design, and what I love about how it's going to, how we're going to be able to evaluate it, is that it is 2 colors, or black and red with white. So and it's not super busy. So we're not like trying to fight a background. We're not trying to fight copy, things like that. So I think it's kind of, it also a very interesting way to take Vaz as a tool and see how it works.
Right.
So in this very first holistic view for the hotspots, it's really showing us that these 2 areas that you were hoping would be probability of being seen in the first 3 to 5 seconds is actually being seen. But I like to go next is to this heat map. Like Sean was showing, the heat map really shows you a lot more information about like what's popping. And because we know that the Ks are red, there's some red diamonds here. We've got the hearts are red and those Ks are red. So we know that that's going to be drawing some attention. And then this area has a lot of contrast. So we've got this big area of design and these beautiful crowns that are made from the glyphs, which is just awesome. And then let's take a look at the gaze sequence. So this gaze sequence also is showing us that in the first 3 to 5 seconds, the probability of being seen is happening right in the center of this design. So you're going to bounce from this lower King of Diamonds up to the King of Spades and hit those 2 crowns, and then kind of rest right here between the King of Spades and then that center design.
Yeah.
So next I want to just take a look at those areas of interest again and also review the visual elements. And Sean went through this with Juan's designs, but I wanted to talk about how it works for your designs. And again, like because this is black and white with red, we get an opportunity to see really how the red shines and how luminosity and contrast really shine. So these 5 ingredients, the edges, intensity, the red, green, blue, yellow, and faces, if you add all of those points up, you'll get this percentage here. So that's, so if you're trying to figure out like, oh, this is super intense, but then you're maybe losing out on the color, right? Or this is low edges, but it's got really good color. Like, so all of the things come together to give you your final score. And then you can view them in these maps. So the edges is showing us, B definitely has some good, strong edges. In intensity, C's got some really great intensity. And you're also seeing intensity here, right? Probably created from that shadow of the card. And then there's quite a bit of intensity that's happening over where the cards are kind of flying out of the box. And I think, again, that's a contrast thing, but it's interesting to see, right? And we didn't call that out as an area. So it'd be interesting to see, like, I don't think it's an area that we need to measure per se for effect, like for our desired results or the probability of being seen, but it could be just interesting to understand. And then of course, in the red, green and the blue, yellow, like just seeing how the color really makes a difference. And then the overall combined effect. So I want to ask you, Julie, do you think that this tool is working for you? Like, is it helping? Do you think it would be helpful for you just going as you're designing, like being able to check and see?
Absolutely. Especially when like placing elements on the page, you could just quickly check and see if it's the right placement.
Absolutely. And I wanted to point out one other thing in the web app. nuts. I don't have it set up. Oh, hold on one moment.
There we go.
So I analyze these also in the web app. And what I think is kind of interesting is we can, for content that is unusual shaped like yours, like the cards, even though they're technically rectangular,
They're flying all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. So if you had content that was irregular shaped and you wanted to understand specifically how that irregular shape can get understood, because Vaz basically takes the whole bounding box in Photoshop. It'll take all of that negative area around the shape. So if we were only trying to specifically understand the card faces, you could also just bring in, and I already did this in advance, and basically the data is virtually the same. And I think it's partly because it's not crazy and there's not a lot of craziness happening in the background.
Right.
But if there was like a wallpaper in the background, that might completely affect how that card face is seen, right?
Exactly.
So I want to show that you can take the tool and actually make a polygon and select specific areas.
Gotcha. I did that earlier. It was intuitive enough that I figured it out without.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So anyway, I just wanted to share that piece of information too. I don't want to get lost. It's important. Yeah. Do you have any other questions?
No. I mean, so in Photoshop, I'll just go in and load it like any other plugin.
Yep. You'll go into the Creative Cloud and you go into the marketplace and then you type in Vaz and the options will come up for Photoshop, XD, and for Illustrator.
Cool.
Yeah, and Illustrator works the same way as Photoshop. Sorry, Sean.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just saying, I realized I forgot to show Julie's slide and have her introduce herself. So here is Julie, typography, UX, UI, and illustration. Julie, is there anything else you'd like to say about yourself or Purple Pachyderm Design?
Actually, I changed Purple Pachyderm Design to Julie Dawson Design just recently, and I haven't moved over my email yet. I'm debating I should definitely do it because it's a pain every time I have to read it off to somebody. But I already have a lot of people that have this email, so I guess I'm gonna have to just send out like a email to everyone, hey, new address, and switch it over to the juliedawsondesign.com because spelling pachyderm for people can be very difficult sometimes, especially over the phone. So no, I don't really have anything else to say. I was really impressed with the way that the software worked, and I was impressed that my design actually did what it was supposed to do.
It really did. It was great.
Yeah,
I loved it. And I honestly, I love the fact that it was just black, white, and red. That really just kind of showcases the ability of Vaz to understand the probability of your stuff, your designs being seen in the first 3
right. I do have one more question. I wanted to send you guys a package of the cards, and there's an address in the emails that you sent. Is that a good address to send them?
I can't
Let me find it. Hold on.
Yeah, that should be good. Let's reconnect on this one offline.
Yeah,
if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks, guys. And thank you, Julie and Juan, for your time. We really appreciate us go through your designs online.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone online, for joining us. A quick plug for Vaz. You can try it for free on vaz.3m.com. And if you sign up for our web app through that free trial and use the promo code portfolio, as a thank you for coming to this session, we'll give you an additional 5 analyses in Vaz before your free trial runs out. So at this point, I'd like to open it up for any more question and answer.
All right. Well, I saw a couple come through during the reviews. I'll just combine them because I think they're related. From Margot was asking about whether or not Vaz recognizes symbols or icons. And then Logan was also asking something similar, like, does Vaz take into consideration things like hamburger menus or things that we anticipate seeing, or like a logo in the top left corner of a website?
Yeah, I can take this one. The answer is kind of no. So logos and icons and all of that kind of just fall into shapes, edges, and colors, the same way that text and other factors do. So again, for that pre-conscious vision phase, that won't show up any differently than anything else will. That said, now appropriately using them and placing them where people expect them to be is absolutely critical for that conscious vision phase. So especially if smaller things like that, like icons or in particular the hamburger menu, they likely won't jump out to us pre-consciously. They're not the most visually interesting things on the page. So it's important to put them somewhere where the user will consciously understand where to find them. And from there, I should probably stop talking and let Martine talk about logo placement as the actual designer. But the short answer is, in pre-conscious vision, no. They won't show up any differently to Vaz.
I think a good way to look at it is, to put everything on a level playing field. And if something's not showing up the way you want it to, is there an opportunity for you to increase contrast? Is there an opportunity for you to change the color? Is there an opportunity for you to move it to another location where it has more breathing room? It's those kinds of design decisions. And that can be a thing that Vaz can really potentially help you understand, that in the first 3 to 5 seconds, it's not getting recognized. But hey, if I move this little yellow thing here, maybe I can make it red, and I move it here and it's in kind of a field by itself. Okay, maybe that's really a great opportunity for it to get viewed. So yeah, design decisions.
We have a comment and question from Caroline, who says that she's curious to see the tool work on a layout that has many competing or overlapping elements, like a social media post or a digital ad that is not working effectively. What happens when there are competing points of interest?
A short summary is that attention is shared, so that when you bring attention to one aspect, you by kind of definition take it away from others. I don't think I have a good kind of like social media one. Maybe I'll take one more look at these two side by side to show an example, though. So as you bring more attention to these areas with these images, you decrease the visibility, you decrease the attention that goes to other places of the image. Maybe I'll take an example of this Scotch scissors. So this was a packaging redesign that was done on actually one of my products, one of these scissors, that a lot of the issue we had was attention was going to the handle up here of the actual scissor, which wasn't one of our goals. We wanted to get the attention to the text here. So in order to do that, what we did was add the black and add the color, make this text more bold, and add that contrast by creating that black bar. And that was able to bring the attention farther down. So if you look at the actual heat map here, rather than it being yellow up here, it's now kind of blue because the attention was spread a little thinner, pulled a little farther. So there really is only so much attention to go around. And when you have competing elements or things like ads that are really bright on social media, they really fight each other and fight everything else on the page for that kind of limited amount of attention. Does that help? Sorry, that's not quite a perfect answer, but
I think it was a really good answer myself.
Caroline says understood, thank you, in the chat. So that was wonderful. Sally has another question. If we encourage our companies to sign up for Vaz, is there customer service available if questions arise, or more online info? Like, what is the service associated with Vaz?
For sure, yeah. So for corporate accounts, so for anybody, if you sign up and email us at hellovaz@mmm.com, either Lisa or I will answer that email, and we'll help you through any kind of troubleshooting that you have, or set up some time to talk if you would like to. For corporate accounts, we do offer support. So I believe that's a minimum of 10 licenses, and that includes 2 to 3 trainings for global offices. It includes account switching, as well as payment by invoice. So if you do get a larger sign up or a corporate sign up, we offer that kind of customer support beyond the basic customer support by email that everybody gets.
So thanks again to Sean and Martine for presenting, and thanks to Julie and Juan for showing your work and running it through Vaz for us. Thanks again, everyone.